The Bonanno crime family is one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City and in the United States as part of the criminal phenomenon known as the American Mafia. The family was known as the Maranzano crime family until its founder Salvatore Maranzano was murdered in 1931. Joseph Bonanno was awarded most of Maranzano's operations. Under the leadership of Bonanno between the 1930s and 1960s, the family was one of the most powerful in the country. However, in the early 1960s, Bonanno attempted to overthrow several leaders of the commission, but failed. Bonanno had disappeared from 1964 to 1966, ensuing the Banana War that lasted until 1908, when Bonanno retired to Arizona. Between 1976 and 1981, the family was infiltrated by an FBI agent calling himself Donnie Brasco. The family became the first of the New York families to be kicked off the commission. The family only recovered in the 1990s under Joseph Massino, and by the dawn of the new millennium was not only back on the commission, but also was the most powerful family in New York. However, in the early 2000s, a rash of convictions culminated in Massino himself becoming a government informant, the first boss of one of the 5 families in New York City to do so. The Bonanno family were seen as the most brutal of the 5 families during the 20th century. The Genovese crime family is one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City and New Jersey as part of the American Mafia. They have generally maintained a varying degree of influence over many of the smaller mob families outside New York, including ties with the Philadelphia, Patriarca, and Buffalo crime families. The current family was founded by Charles Lucky Luciano, and was known as the Luciano crime family from 1931 to 1957, when it was renamed after boss Vito Genovese. Originally in control of the waterfront on the west side of Manhattan and the Fulton Fish Market, the family was run for years by the Oddfather, Vincent the Chin Gigante, who feigned insanity by shuffling unshaven through New York's Greenwich Village wearing a tattered bath robe and muttering to himself incoherently, to avoid prosecution. The Genovese family is the oldest and the largest of the 5 families. Finding new ways to make money in the 21st century, the family took advantage of lax due diligence by banks during the housing bubble, with a wave of mortgage frauds. Prosecutors say loan shark victims obtained home equity loans to pay off debts to their mob bankers. The family found ways to use new technology to improve on illegal gambling, with customers placing bets through offshore sites via the internet. Although the leadership of the Genovese family seemed to have been in limbo after the death of Gigante in 2005, they appear to be the most organized and powerful family in the United States, with sources believing that Liborio Barney Bellomo is the current boss of the organization. Unique in today's mafia, the family has benefited greatly from members following Omerta, a code of conduct emphasizing secrecy and non-cooperation with law enforcement and the justice system. While many mobsters from across the country have testified against their crime families since the 1980s, the Genovese family has had only 8 members turn state's evidence in its history. As of 2020, no more news of the Genovese family. The Gambino crime family is one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City, United States, within the nationwide criminal phenomenon known as the American Mafia. The group, which went through 5 bosses between 1910 and 1957, is named after Carlo Gambino, boss of the family at the time of the McClellan hearings in 1963, when the structure of organized crime first gained public attention. The group's operations extend from New York and the eastern seaboard to California. Its illicit activities include labor and construction racketeering, gambling, loan sharking, extortion, money laundering, prostitution, fraud, hijacking, and fencing. The family was one of the 5 families that were founded in New York after the Castellamarese War of 1931. For most of the next quarter century, it was a minor player in organized crime. Its most prominent member during this time was its underboss Albert Anastasia, who rose to infamy as the operating head of the underworld's enforcement arm, Murder, Inc. He remained in power even after Murder, Inc. was smashed in the late 1940s, and took over his family in 1951 by all accounts, after murdering the family's founder, Vincent Mangano, which was then recognized as the Anastasia crime family.
Before we continue with the rest of the story, if you are enjoying this video and wish to hear about more scary or creepy stories and abandoned places, please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon for notifications. Now, let's return to the story.
The Colombo crime family is the youngest of the 5 families that dominates organized crime activities in New York City, United States, within the nationwide criminal organization known as the American Mafia. It was during Lucky Luciano's organization of the American Mafia after the Castellamarese War, and the assassinations of Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, that the gang run by Joseph Profaci was recognized as the Profaci crime family. The family traces its roots to a bootlegging gang formed by Joseph Profaci in 1928. Profaci would rule his family without interruption or challenge until the late 1950s. The family has been torn by 3 internal wars. The first war took place during the late 1950s when Capo Joe Gallo revolted against Profaci, but it lost momentum in the early 1960s when Gallo was arrested and Profaci died of cancer. The family was not reunited until the early 1960s under Joseph Colombo. In 1971, the Second Family War began after Gallo's release from prison and the shooting of Colombo. Colombo's supporters led by Carmen Persico won the Second War after the exiling of the remaining Gallo crew to the Genovese family in 1975. The family would then enjoy over 15 years of peace under Persico and his string of acting bosses. In 1991, the third and bloodiest war erupted when acting boss Victor Orena tried to seize power from the imprisoned Carmen Persico. The family split into factions loyal to Orena and Persico, and 2 years of mayhem ensued. It ended in 1993, with 12 family members dead and Orena imprisoned, leaving Persico the winner more or less by default. He was left with a family decimated by war. Persico continued to run the family until his death in 2019, but it has never recovered from the war. In the 2000s, the family was further crippled by multiple convictions in federal racketeering cases and numerous members becoming government witnesses. Many levels of law enforcement believe that the Colombo crime family is the weakest of the 5 families of New York City. On March 7, 2019, longtime family boss Carmen Persico died in prison. The Lucchese crime family is one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City, United States, within the nationwide criminal phenomenon known as the American Mafia. The family originated in the early 1920s, with Gaetano Reina serving as boss up until his murder in 1930. It was taken over by Tommy Gagliano during the Castellamarese War, and led by him until his death in 1951. Known as the Gagliano crime family under Gagliano, was peaceful and low-key, concentrating their criminal activities in the Bronx, Manhattan and New Jersey. The next boss was Tommy Lucchese, who served as Gagliano's underboss for over 20 years, who turned the family around to become one of the most powerful families to sit on the commission. Lucchese teamed up with Gambino crime family boss, Carlo Gambino, to control organized crime in New York City. Lucchese had a stronghold on the garment industry in New York and took control of many crime rackets for his crime family. When Lucchese died of a brain tumor in 1967, Carmine Tramonti controlled the family for a brief time. He was arrested in 1973 for funding a major heroin network, and died 5 years later. Anthony Corallo then gained control of the family. Corallo was very secretive and soon became one of the most powerful members of the commission. He was arrested and convicted in the famous Commission case of 1986. For most of its history, the Lucchese family was reckoned as one of the most peaceful crime families in the nation. However, that changed when Corallo named Victor Amuso his successor shortly before going to prison. Amuso later promoted one of his longtime partners, Anthony Casso, to underboss. Starting with the Windows case in 1986, they instituted one of the bloodiest reigns in mafia history, ordering virtually anyone who crossed them to be murdered. It is estimated that Casso himself has murdered between 30-40 people and has ordered over 100 murders during his reign. He was sentenced to 455 years in prison. Casso also had authority over NIP detectives Luis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, both carried out at least 8 murders for him. Amuso was arrested in 1991 and sentenced to life in prison. Several Lucchese Wiseguis, fearing for their lives, turned informant. The highest profile of these was acting boss Alphonse Darco, who became the first boss of a New York crime family to testify against the mob. This led to the arrest of the entire Lucchese family hierarchy, with Casso also becoming an informant. Testimony from these informants nearly destroyed the family, with as many as half of its members incarcerated. Amuso has continued to rule the family from prison.